first name than me. Wyrick.
Does
Okay.
someone have an extra pen or pencil?
There's some in that classroom on the end.
good.
I went and got
Would
one.
you give me one, Kathy?
Sure.
I'm sorry, I should have brought them all. I hid mine from the girls and then.
Should have brought that from.
Yeah, I just usually have one here, but I guess I took it off last night.
Better
I try to keep one in my purse.
Yeah, I thought I had one in my purse.
And I had one with my stuff, and I had 2 cards to mail, and Emery ripped open the card I was mailing. So I taped it up and wrote a note. Sorry, Emery, open your mail.
Back down the street, and I put that in
Another
there,
envelope.
construction, that was at 10,
She'll
11.
laugh. It'll make it better.
And that's what the construction.
You just blew onions.
Well, if I get stopped by the lawyer's officer, I'll bring them with me.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anybody else need a pen?
All right, ladies, good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you
Good
so
morning.
much for being here today. I'm really sorry about having to miss last week. I couldn't talk, not without some extreme effort. It really, not that my throat hurt, but just that it was not, my voice was just to whisper, but that was unhelpful. But I'm glad to be back with you today. I'm glad that we're able to be together again and to move forward. We've been talking about the Old Testament. We've talked about the historical biblical timeline from beginning to now. We talked about the seed line of Jesus through the Old Testament, and then we talked about 2 weeks ago the kingdom of Israel and its history in the Old Testament, and we looked at those charts that Clint had made several years ago. Many of you have those. If you have them today, again, they'll be helpful, but if you don't have them, they're not necessary. But later, they might be helpful to look at. Today, we're going to focus on the Old Testament canon, just the 39 books of the Old Testament. We're going to look at the Old Testament in 2 ways. We're first going to look at the Jewish canon the way that Jews look at it, and then we're going to look at it the way that is most helpful for us as students of the Bible, mainly chronologically, is how we're going to look at that today. So two ways of looking, viewing the Old Testament, and I have 2 handouts for you for both of those ways. So here's the first one. I'll just give you this, and if you'll hand that out. Clint made both of these years ago. They're helpful just to see things, to have it out in front of you while I'm talking. So this first one is called the Jewish Old Testament canon. The word canon just means a list of books that are considered authoritative, and the Jews definitely considered the Old Testament books as authoritative, so they refer to this, the 39 books, as the Old Testament canon. But they categorize these 39 books into 3 major subdivisions, or 3 major categories. 3 major sections. The first one is called the Torah, which that word is Hebrew and it just means law. And the second major section is known as the prophets. The Hebrew word is there, Nephthim. And then the third major section is called the writings. These are the 3 major sections, divisions, the way that the Jewish people divided up the Old Testament canon. There's a lot of wondering why they divided it up this way. Maybe just for convenience sake, but I think there's some legitimate reasons why. So we're going to talk about that here just for a little bit. The first major section is called the Torah, or the law, and this refers to the first 5 books of the Old Testament. Torah, like I said, just means law. Now, specifically, these 5 books are also known as the Pentateuch. Have y'all ever heard of that? I know you have. Pentateuch. That's a Greek word, though. Pentateuch is, if you divide the word in half, this means 5. Penta means 5. Hello. And then this just means books. Tukos is the word. Pentateuch, that's the Greek word. Torah is the Hebrew word. But the Greek word, it's also known as the Pentateuch, which means 5 books. Herein is contained the law of Moses, basically. The 5 books that God instructed Moses to write. We see this very clearly within the Pentateuch itself. I'll write these verses down if we want to turn there and look at them, or if you just want to write them down. They're very helpful verses. In Exodus 17 and verse 4, that's where God actually instructs Moses to write. And Moses does that, of course. In Deuteronomy 31:9, the verse says that Moses wrote the law. He wrote the Torah. This, of course, is the first book. Here's the last book. He wrote the Torah, and in verse 24, it says that he finished it. Moses finished it. So Moses finished writing the first 5 books of the Old Testament. Other writers, other Old Testament writers outside of the Torah also believed that Moses wrote these books. For example, in Joshua 1, I think it's 7 and 8, God reconfirms to Joshua that Moses was the author of the law. 1 Kings 2:3 is another one. This is though David, in his last words to his son Solomon, confirming Moses' authorship of the Torah. Ezra 6:18 is Ezra believing that Moses wrote the Torah. And then Daniel 9:11 through 13, I believe, is Daniel believing also that Moses wrote the first 5 books of the Old Testament. But most importantly, Jesus believed it. In John 7:19, he said, "Did not Moses give you the law?" So Jesus believed that Moses wrote the first 5 books of the Old Testament. In John 7:19. So it's pretty well established. Nobody worth their salt argues about Moses being the author of the Torah, this first section. Did you get a worksheet? Yeah, you did. You got it. Okay. Now the second middle section on this handout is the prophets. You'll see here we have Joshua, Judges, the book of Judges, Samuel, the book of Kings, that would include 1st and 2nd Kings, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and then the 12, which refers to the 12 minor prophets in our Old Testaments. Former and latter here, this just has to do with historically and chronologically. These are the earliest prophets, beginning with Joshua, the later ones in Israel's history there, beginning with Isaiah. This section is designated as such because these men who are listed here actually held a prophetic office. That was their job, to be prophets. They prophesied to nations. That was their work. The next section, that's called the writings, does contain some people like Daniel, who we know prophesied, but that was not his major work. That was not his main office, was as a prophet. He didn't go to a nation in order to prophesy to them about repenting or anything like that. But he did have a prophetic gift at times, but he's not included in the middle section there. He's included with the writings, beginning with Psalms, Proverbs, Job. And then this little group of 5 here, Song of Solomon, Ruth, Lamentations, Ezekiel, and Esther. These, Clint has on the paper, became known as the Megillah. These are some of the shorter books in the Old Testament, and they began to be incorporated as special readings during fasts or feasts. in later centuries, like we're talking like the 6th through the 9th centuries AD. So these began to be read during special feasts or fasts because they're short. And so this group of 5 just became known as that. Megillah is, anyway. And if you'll notice here, what's really interesting is Chronicles, the book of Chronicles closes out this 3rd subsection. That would include both 1st and 2nd Chronicles, and that's going to come into play here in just a second. So, the Jews categorized the Old Testament canon this way in 3 major sections. Why? I'm not sure, other than that this makes some sense, that it categorizes it in a way that makes some sense. Maybe it was just for convenience, I don't know. But regardless, Jesus looked at the scriptures like that. Turn in your Bibles to Luke 24. In Luke 24 and verse 44, does somebody want to read that? This is Jesus talking, by the way, for those who don't have the red letter version Bible.
And he said unto them, These are the words which I spake unto you while I was yet with you, that all things must be fulfilled, which were written in the law of Moses, and in the prophets, and in the Psalms concerning me.
Okay, there are the 3 major sections of the Old Testament canon. Jesus lays them out here. The law of Moses, we know that as the Torah. That's the first blue section on your paper. The prophets, that's the middle section. And then the Psalms, or actually the writings, there are is the 3rd major section of the Jewish Old Testament canon. So Jesus validates the whole of Old Testament scripture here in what he says. And that says a lot. He's validating and saying this is all written by God, all inspired, every one of these books. Okay, and the next one, Luke 11. This is really fun and interesting. This is something else that Jesus says, beginning in verse 49.
Nope.
I can't see anything this morning.
Luke 11:49.
All right, beginning in verse 49 through 51, I'll go ahead and read that. Jesus here speaking again, he says, Therefore the wisdom of God also said, I will send them prophets and apostles, and some of them they will kill and persecute, that the blood of all the prophets, which was shed from the foundation of the world, may be required of this generation. From the blood of Abel to the blood of Zechariah, who perished between the altar and the temple. Yes, I say to you, it shall be required of this generation. So we know here that Jesus is talking about these prophets and apostles, all of these men that God sent to prophesy to his people. Many were mistreated, martyred, killed, and from the blood of Abel to the blood of Zechariah. And it's interesting that Jesus chose these 2 men in this verse, because the blood of Abel, of course, what book is he found in? Genesis. That's the very, very first book, of course, of the law, the Torah. And then where do we find Zechariah? Well, we find him in Chronicles. Right there in 2nd Chronicles toward the end, we have the blood of Zechariah, who was murdered, who died between the altar and the temple. And so you know, as I pointed out on our handout, Chronicles closes out the canon because it was the history of the Israelites. 1st Chronicles begins with Adam, opens up right with Adam, and then you have at the end of Chronicles the end of when they're gone into captivity and they're destroyed and the people or the nation is over. And so Jesus uses these two men as bookends, so to speak, to this canon. Does that make sense? Abel at the beginning, Zechariah at the end. I thought that was fun and interesting. Okay, so that really is the gist of this handout, the way that the Jews view the Old Testament canon, how they look at it, the way Jesus looked at it. The next chart now, we're going to talk about how one of the ways that is most helpful for us. What is the most helpful way for us to look at the Old Testament canon? I do believe that it's very helpful to be able to look at these 39 books chronologically. It's helpful because it places them in history so that we can know when they were written, who they were written to, why they were written. Because as you know, when you open up to the Old Testament, or if you look at the table of contents of your Old Testament, these books are not in chronological order, and they're really confusing, or can be really confusing. So we're just going to look at their chronology a little bit with this chart. Once everybody. Oh, if you have this one, the timeline that we handed out a couple weeks ago, if you have this chart, that'll be helpful too. You don't have to have it, but if you have it, much of this information is on there as well. Everybody have this one? Okay, good.
I don't have, you don't have this one. You don't have that one, but you have this one. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. It's good. Okay, so let's just explain this handout a little bit. There's a big red box in the middle, a big red rectangle box in the middle that is titled The Historical Flow of the Old Testament as contained in these books. Okay, so I don't know if you remember from a couple weeks ago, we did list like the first several books of the Old Testament, and all of those are in chronological order. Is that you? That's not you.
That's my
It is
phone.
me and somebody else.
I have to leave it
Feel like
on
I
in
need to
case
answer
one
the
calls.
Okay, so this is what we talked about really a couple of weeks ago. The historical flow of the Old Testament goes from Genesis through 2nd Chronicles. You'll see in the purple boxes below the blue boxes where it says 1st Chronicles, 2nd Chronicles. That's the history that each of those books covers. So 1st Chronicles covers from Adam to the end of 2nd Samuel, and then 2nd Chronicles covers the history of 1st Kings, but through the exile up until Cyrus comes, which is the king of Persia. So he butts up right there with the book of Ezra because that's where Ezra opens up. Okay, so this is the historical flow. So just as a reminder, Genesis through 2nd Chronicles, those books are in chronological order. So you can read them like a novel. They read like a book. But then, after 2nd Chronicles, you get into some books that are way out of order, right? We open up with Ezra, but Ezra is not the next thing that happens chronologically or historically. We have 1,000 other books, it seems like, that we need to fit somewhere. And so if you'll look below the red box, there's some books in yellow, there's some more books in blue. Those two books in blue, Leviticus and Deuteronomy, they fit right up in there. I'm not sure why Clint didn't just stick them all up in there with the rest of the blue ones, but anyway, they fit up there in the blue, and they're in chronological order there. Now, Job, he's the first yellow box on the left here. Most scholars believe that he lived and died during the age of patriarchy, which was during like the days of Abraham. And so his book, took place early. Genesis 12 is where we're introduced first to Abraham. So somewhere in there was Job, and the life that he lived. So that's why his book, chronologically, is put way up there. But we know in our Bibles, when you look at the table of contents, Job's not way up there. But chronologically, that's where his book would fit. The next yellow box on this handout is Ruth. Chronologically, she fits with the Judges. That's when her story takes place. So if you wanted to read, of course, in our Bible, she is chronologically there. Joshua, Judges, Ruth. So she is there. And then you have another, I don't know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 yellow boxes here. Clint has these first 5 designated as songs and poetry. Psalms, Proverbs, Song of Solomon, Ecclesiastes, Lamentations. They're just written in a different style. Psalms, of course, we know most of them are written by David. And so Clint has this book up there, of course, when David lived in 1 Samuel, 1st, 2nd Samuel. And then, of course, we know that Proverbs, Song of Solomon, and Ecclesiastes were written by Solomon. And so his reign, of course, didn't start to 1 Kings, so those books are placed there chronologically. That makes sense. Now, I do have an issue with the next yellow box. I think it should be green. Yellow-green, because it goes with Jeremiah. Jeremiah's up at the top. You see Isaiah, Jeremiah, Daniel, Ezekiel, their boxes are shaded a little bit of green, bluish yellow-green. Lamentations, of course, goes with Jeremiah because he wrote that book. That was his companion book. But it is written, I know why Clint put down in here with songs and poetry, because it's written in a different style than Jeremiah's book. But that's where that fits, Jeremiah. So if Lamentations fits there, that's where Jeremiah fits too.
So is that what the yellow means? They're
written different style.
okay.
Instead of a narrative or historical account, they're written in this song format or poetry
So
format.
all of the yellow ones are kind of in that category.
Yeah, so I don't know. I don't know if I put Job, Ruth, and Esther there.
Right.
There are some things that are unique to their books that are kind of like that, but they're historical too. So
Just a different writing style than the blue,
Yeah,
basically.
yes, the blue denotes history mainly, that they're historical narrative books. Any more questions about the colors you can take up with Clint? Right? He might be. No, he won't. Okay, so now we have Esther there. We'll talk about her in a minute. She's the last yellow one on the bottom. But I do want to move to the top, because now we have the prophets. And this is where we'll take a little bit of time, because this is where I think this is most helpful. I have in the front of my Bible, in the front of the Old Testament, I have written the major and minor prophets in chronological order. Why? Because if somebody mentions Haggai from the pulpit, and I'll be like, I don't know, I don't remember when he prophesied and who he prophesied to, I can flip to the front of my Bible real quick and look there and go, oh, okay, well that's where in history he worked. Or I can flip to his book, because I do have it written there in the front of his book. But I'm going to list those here. If you want to jot them down, wonderful. If you want to then put them in your Bible for later, wonderful.
Is it a chronological order?
Yes, so now this is the chronology of the Old Testament prophets. All right? All of them. The major and minor. I should say this too. The ones that Clint has colored in this bluish, yellowish, greenish color, those are the major prophets. There's 5 major prophet books.
Which ones are you talking about?
At the top,
These.
yep, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Daniel, and Ezekiel are the 4 major prophets. Lamentations goes with Jeremiah, so those are 5 major prophet books. The rest of them, there should be 12, are minor prophets. Major and minor doesn't mean that one group was more important than the other. It just means that the major prophets' books were longer. It has to do with the content was there's 66 chapters in the book of Isaiah. Whereas you have Obadiah with 1 chapter, Jonah has 4 chapters. You see how that works. So it's not because Isaiah, Jeremiah, Daniel, Ezekiel were more important than the minor prophets, but it's just that their works, their writings were longer, so they've been designated as major prophets. The same with minor prophets, their writings are shorter. I will tell you this though, I think this is very interesting. Daniel's book only has 12 chapters in our Old Testaments. But we have Hosea and Zechariah both have 14 chapters. And you think, well, wait, why aren't they major prophets? Well, because the actual Hebrew material within Daniel is longer. There's actually more, even though it's just designated as 12 chapters in our Old Testaments, the material actually within Daniel is longer, greater in content, words, than the 14 chapters in Hosea and Zechariah. So there you have that. Okay, so the chronology of the Old Testament prophets. Here we go. So this is where, like I said, if you have these charts, it's helpful because you're going to see most of them on here already. But if you don't have it, that's fine too. You can just jot them down. You can look at it later. It's all on there. The first prophet to prophesy chronologically, most scholars believe, was Joel. Joel prophesied about the 800s BC. And he prophesied to the south, the southern kingdom of Judah. You remember that God's kingdom after Solomon was divided into the north and to the south. The southern kingdom became known as Judah, and the northern kingdom became known as Israel. And Joel was one of the earliest prophets to the southern kingdom. All right? Minor prophet. Number 2, the second prophet was Obadiah. He's about the same time. But he did not prophesy to any of the north or the south. He prophesied to a kingdom called, or to a nation of people called Edom. They were descendants of Esau. If you remember Jacob and Esau, the twins. Esau's people became known as Edom. So Obadiah, that 1 chapter book, is words to Edom. Number 3 is Jonah. Jonah prophesied about the late 700s, so I'm just going to write that. You know, some of these you just can't be exact. Late 700s is where Jonah falls. He prophesied, of course, once again, not to the north or to the south. Who did he prophesy to? He didn't want to go there.
Nineveh.
That's right. Nineveh. Number 4, we run now into a major prophet. This is Isaiah. He prophesied probably in the 750s to the 700s. He prophesied a long time. Is that illegible back there?
It's good.
Good? Okay. And he prophesied to the south. Number 5 is Micah. Same as Isaiah. He was a contemporary of Isaiah. And there's 2 more who are contemporaries here. The next one is Hosea. Same time frame, but instead he prophesied to the north, to Israel. So if you had your handout from a couple weeks ago, you would find Hosea right there in his blue box, prophesying to the north at the same time as Isaiah and Micah. They were contemporaries. One more contemporary during this time is Amos. Same time, really, I was writing to close it out. But he prophesied to the north, not to the south. So Isaiah, Micah, Hosea, and Amos all prophesied at the same time. These two to the south, these two to the north. All right. Next, after Amos, Nahum. He prophesied about the 640s BC. And he did not prophesy to the north and south. He prophesied to, does anybody remember? Nineveh. Once again, 100 and some years later. Nahum. And then we have Zephaniah. About 630s BC, and he prophesied to the south. Judah. Next, this would be Jeremiah, which would also include Lamentations, major prophet. He prophesied about the 630s. He prophesied for a long time, so then he went into the late 500s too. I don't know what else to put there. Other than that, somewhere he prophesied a long time. And this was to the south. Judah. All right. Habakkuk. About 625 BC to the south, Judah. The rest are going to be to the south in Judah because the north has already been carried away into Assyrian captivity. So there's no more prophets to the north because there is no more north. Number 12 would be Daniel. I have him, this is another difficult one to nail down, time-wise, like as far as how long. We know it's about 606 BC that he started, and he went into the 500s too, because he was taken away into captivity in Babylon himself, so the same. And then Ezekiel was his contemporary. 600s really. Same. And now we get into off your chart. You don't have the rest of this chart, but that's okay. I'm just going to draw a line here to denote the fact that now Israel, or God's people, all of them are in captivity. By the time of Daniel and Ezekiel, the south has been carried away to Babylon. And Daniel goes to Babylon. And so there is no more nation of Israel over in Canaan. They are all now in a new country serving Nebuchadnezzar. And that's kind of where their history closes for a while, until we open up it, like on this chart, in that blue middle, the historical flow. We see the exile after 2 Kings, that's when they're taken away. And then the next book that happens is Ezra. When we open up to Ezra chapter 1, we're introduced to a new king and a new nation that's the world superpower, that of Persia, and King Cyrus. Cyrus is the one who issues the decree for all of the Jewish people to go back home, get out of Babylon, because now Babylon is no longer the world superpower. The Persians have come in and taken over, and so now they're ruling as the superpower. And Cyrus doesn't get it while all these Jewish people are in Babylon. They don't need to be there, so they can go back home. So he issues a decree that says, okay, Jewish Israelites go home. And so that happens. And so Ezra and Nehemiah record that. If you remember, when the exile occurred, it occurred in 3 phases. There were 3 deportations out of the land of Canaan to Babylon. Happened in 3 stages. So the return happens the same way. In 3 stages, the return of God's people to Canaan happens and is recorded in Ezra and the book of Nehemiah. But in there we're going to fit Esther. So here, hang with me here. Can I erase this? Are you good with erasing that? Because there's a lot to write here about Ezra.
So how long were they in Babylonian captivity?
70 years.
Wait a minute.
That's
What?
right.
Wait 1 second. Oh, just in case. Oh, I can't see it. Wait a
Yeah,
minute.
it's not-
There, that's better. Yeah. I might be able to blow it up. Okay. You can erase.
Okay. So,
Just in case.
yeah, the Israelites, the Jewish nation was in captivity in Babylon for 70 years. Daniel recognized that when he was reading, I think, the prophet Jeremiah. Jeremiah prophesied about that 70-year captivity. Daniel recognizes that, and then prays about it because that 70 years is almost up in Daniel's day, and he gets excited about that. And he trusts God that God means what he says, and those 70 years are going to be up, and they're going to get to go home. Anyway, I don't remember what chapters in Daniel that was, but that happened in Daniel. Okay, so we ended with Daniel and Ezekiel, and so now they're in exile. But when you open up now, historically, after Ezekiel, the next book that would fall chronologically is Ezra. And I think I have this as number 14. But Ezra's book, okay. Ezra's book can be evenly divided into 2 parts. Chapters 1 through 6, and then 7 through 14, I think it is. I have that right here. 7 through 10. Okay, so Ezra 1 through 6 is actually the first chronological section because this is the first return. This records the first return of God's people in 536 BC. This is 70 years after their first deportation out of Israel in 606 BC. So Ezra chapters 1 through 6 records their first return, and this is under the leadership of Zerubbabel. I don't know if y'all remember his name or not. I don't remember how to spell it. Zerubbabel. And under his direction, the foundation of the temple is laid. And that's what's recorded in Ezra, chapters 1 through 6. I guess I should say Ezra 5. But in Ezra chapter 6, we have now the temple completed in 516 under his. So we have here, let's see, 516, and the temple is finished. So that's all in Ezra chapters 1 through 6. And in my Bible, right after the last verse of chapter 6, right before the beginning of chapter 7, I wrote there, read Esther, because that's where Esther fits. Historically. The book of Esther fits here. Ahasuerus is the king, Vashti is the queen, and they are Persian. Next, historically and chronologically, we have the Book of Haggai. This is about 520 BC, and of course this is, I just put here, this is to the remnant, because these are the ones who came back, who were able to return. And God prophesied about that remnant a lot in Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel. Alright, number 17, Zechariah. Is the next minor prophet. Same. All of that in between Ezra chapters 6 and 7. And then finally, we have Ezra 7 through 10. Historically, chronologically, if you were to read these in chronological order, you would start with Ezra chapters 1 through 6, then you would read Esther, then Haggai, then Zechariah, and then finally go back to Ezra chapters 7 through 10. This records the second return. This is about, let's see, 457 BC. This is under the leadership of Ezra. And this is when the law was restored. And then we fit Nehemiah. Nehemiah's book fits here. All of it. This records the third return. Let's see, 444. This is under the leadership of Nehemiah. And under his leadership, you'll read about this in his book. This is where the walls of the city are rebuilt. For protection. One prophet left. Who is that? Yeah. Malachi. About 440. To the remnant. On the left. I just really think that's helpful information to know, and to put, not just maybe in the front of your Bible, but in the actual books. Like I said, between chapters 6 and 7 of Ezra, you can write all of that, because then you'll know historically, oh, that's where all those prophets fit in. And you can go to Haggai and write the same thing. Oh, Zechariah was his contemporary, along with Esther. You could read Esther here. It's before, it's in between the chapters of 6 and 7 in Ezra. And then just to having these dates. Now these are solid dates. 536, the 606 of Daniel that we had up early, those are solid. We know those are solid. Some of these we have to guess general time frame, but these 536, 606, 516, those are pretty solid dates because there's just 70 years of prophetic and historically solid. So we can be sure with those dates. So we finish with Malachi. So back to this handout. So therein is the minor prophets, the major prophets, and how they all fit chronologically in the Old Testament canon. The last one, of course, being Malachi, who closes out the prophets for 400 years until the voice of John the Baptizer, the next one, who's prophesying about the one who's coming. One who greater than him who's coming, whose sandal he's not worthy to unloose. So for 400 years, we have nothing. God chooses to not not that he's not doing anything, but there's nothing there recorded for us that's necessary for us to know. But a lot happened, because when we open up to our New Testaments, we have groups of people now that we've never heard about, like the Pharisees, Sadducees. So during those 400 years after Malachi, but before John the Baptizer, a ton of stuff happened, and is a great study in and of itself, because there's just a lot of information, a lot of events that occurred during those 400 years that help us to know, oh, this is where the Pharisees came from, this is where the Sadducees came from, this is what happened, there were some wars and a whole bunch of stuff going on in there.
What are they called? The Jacobites? Jacobes? Is that what it is?
Maccabees?
Maccabees.
MJ, okay. Maccabees. There's something like that. Thank you.
Anyway, okay, so that, that closes out the Old Testament canon. Any questions about it? I know that's a lot of information. I think it's helpful.
I have a question.
Yep.
So they're bringing the people back in 3 sections.
Mm-hmm.
The people that are left there, that's in Babylon, right? Babylonian captivity is where they're coming out of?
Yeah.
Persia.
Here.
Persia.
At the end.
I get 'em
Okay,
all
what's
mixed
your
up.
question? Wait.
I'm
Persia.
saying during that period of time in the years, or the time between when they're bringing these groups back,
Oh, when they're coming back
are they,
from
whose
Babylon.
control are they? Are they
Persia.
they're still under Persian
Yeah.
control?
Yeah, that's under Babylonian control. They were slaves in Babylon.
Right.
But then Persia
Took over.
became the new world superpower, and so Nebuchadnezzar and all of those who ruled in Babylon were, of course, no more. And Cyrus doesn't care that they're, they don't need to be there. That's not their homeland.
Okay, so they were just kind of
Yeah, they were
free,
they
but still in that.
were, no, they were serving the king of Babylon.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so they were servants under bondage.
Okay.
They weren't just, you know what I mean. Daniel served in the king's court.
But
Right.
even during all that transition
Are you
time?
asking about the people that didn't leave when it was under Persia?
Yeah, I mean, like, you bring the first group, what's happening to the second,
Oh,
third
yeah,
group
yeah.
during that time?
Yeah, oh, I don't know.
Oh.
Yeah, I don't know. They're not under Babylonian
I mean, if they've
rule
been
anymore,
released,
but
but
they
yet
had-
not
so-
back.
But what?
I said if they've been kind of released, but yet not back.
Right, so, my guess would be that, of course, to think about this in terms of, you have now 70 years that these people have lived there. I mean, that you can establish a lot of families in 70 years. You know what I mean? You can have now generations who never knew anything else.
Right.
That's their home.
Right.
Who are comfortable, that's all they know. And so maybe they weren't so excited to get back as that, maybe the first group who lived through the captivity but then were able to return. I mean, because we know that in the books of Ezra, like in Ezra, when they saw that the temple was finished, you had a whole generation of people crying over it because it wasn't anything like Solomon's.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing compared to its glory in Solomon's time. And then you have the other half, a group of people cheering because it's just gorgeous. It's absolutely fantastic because they don't know anything else.
Right.
So you have 70 years is a long time. So that would be my, you had groups of people who just weren't as eager to get back. But they did it in 3 stages, however that worked. Good question. Did you have something, Mary?
Yeah, but it's lost.
Penny talked too much.
It'll come back. I'm sorry. I get so jumbled in my head
That's
with all
right,
these.
that's why I don't, oh yeah, now I remember.
See?
Does anyone know, when did they stop doing the things like slaughtering a calf and all of that? Were they doing that back then in that temple?
Yeah,
Or,
especially once Ezra restored the law.
okay,
Everybody
that's
had
what
to
I
be
was wondering.
reminded.
What law was
Old Testament, the
restored?
Torah.
Okay.
So
All
that
of
pretty
Wow.
much got pushed by the wayside when they were under all this
Yeah,
captivity.
it was, because even in Babylon, the king instructed nobody, everybody to not worship anybody except the king. Right? And Daniel wasn't gonna do that,
Right.
so there was pressure to have no other God except Nebuchadnezzar because he thought he was a god. So there's a whole bunch of Daniel about
Well,
that.
the ark was gone too, so how did
Oh,
they?
yeah, everything out of the temple was
I
stolen
wonder
and
how they did
taken
all
away to
that.
Babylon, and, yeah, they
And
didn't have
eventually they
anything.
had more than just the one temple, so, you know, it's like.
Well, historically, that one was destroyed, another one was built, that one was destroyed, another one was built, so there was a lot of, yeah. Solomon's temple is long
Did you
gone,
say
Ezra's
you
temple is long
Wonder
gone.
what happened to the ark?
So do you think the
know what
whole
happened.
entire
It's
time of
always-
the second temple, there was no ark in there?
They
Yeah, I'm not
destroyed
sure
it.
that I don't think anything of the original
So it disappeared
Vessels.
during that time,
Babylon.
when everything was
Yeah,
just
it's
taken
recorded
away.
that Babylon took everything
Yeah.
that was valuable out of the temple and put it in his temples with his booty, you know, with all of his stuff. I don't know that it ever got, went
Hitler
back.
found it.
It was-
God,
I think Indiana Jones found it,
it.
yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, so yeah, no, and which contributes, I'm sure, to why half the generation of those people in Ezra just wept over this new temple that was nothing like what they remembered. Paled in comparison. But anyway.
And I think it's, with all the pomp and circumstance and things that they had back then, that this had to be done exactly this way and that one. And now, all we really have to do is come to church and worship God in fellowship.
Yeah, the whole Old Testament system of worship is a big shadow, a big small picture of the big picture, which Christ is, of course, the Lamb, the ultimate sacrifice, one time, not multiple times a year or once a year or perpetually, but once. So there's a bunch of that. You read a bunch in the book of Hebrews about the temple imagery and how that's all been fulfilled in Christ, and Jesus is their great high priest. There's nobody else. So all of those things, that superseded Jesus supersedes all of that Old Testament worship, the whole system of worship, by what he came to do.
Beauty and simplicity.
Really, yeah.
Really.
And the way God did that is just, it helps us, for me, I can't help but see the depth of God's wisdom and his foresight, even his character, just like we've talked about before, his love and compassion and how he was willing to be patient with these people for so long, and providing them a way to come to him, so that he could still try to have fellowship with him, because that's what he's always wanted from the beginning, is just fellowship with his creatures, with his creation. We broke that, and so he provided a way, and then provided a greater way through Christ. All of that was for one purpose, to bring us to Jesus, so that we can see how Jesus is greater than that whole system. Not that it was good for its time and purpose, when God gave it, but it's been superseded.
You wonder why the Bible wasn't just written that way in chronological order in the first place.
Yeah, why it wasn't canonized that
But
way?
I have an explanation.
Okay.
Maybe God did it that way so people would have to get involved and study. It's not like if you read Gone with the Wind, okay, I'm done, and I don't have to read it again. But, you have to dig and study, and
Yeah.
I hope that, maybe that's what it was.
I don't think that's true.
I think he did it just to confuse us.
Well, that's why, I was raised in the church, and there's so much of this that I haven't thought so deeply about,
You're
So
right.
that's helping me to
Yeah.
think more deeply about the history of how to actually, I know,
Well, and it's not something that I've been in classes about hardly at
No.
all.
No.
I mean, there's very little church,
Mhm.
history of God's people that study in
Yeah.
where I've been.
I'll tell you honestly, the reason why this kind of information is so important to me is because this is when the whole entire book of the Bible opened up to me, and all of world history. I'll tell you, when I was in high school, I was in an honors history class. I don't know why, because I didn't get it. And passed and everything, but that's how the school system is sometimes. But I didn't get it. They throw out times like BC or AD, and I was just lost, completely lost. Went to college, had to take a history class, failed it, got a D. Before I knew that you could drop, I didn't even know you could drop classes. So I stuck it out, but I got a D because I didn't know what was going on. And so for years, I just didn't get it. I didn't understand it at all until I sat at the feet of a man at Brown Trail who began in Genesis and laid it out just like this. And I couldn't believe it, that I could actually understand it. It all made sense. It fit perfectly. And so from then on, I've taught this to our boys, because when they think of time, I want them to know from the beginning to today and where the Bible fits, where every book fits, historically, chronologically, all of those things. And so when they also, in reading in history books of different empires or leaders, they know where it goes. So that's why I think, it was just so personally helpful to me. I got it after that, and it's just everything else opened up, and so that's why I just think it's so critical.
Well, you shared it well.
Well,
Yes.
thank you, I
You
appreciate
did.
that a lot.
That's good info.
I appreciate that a lot, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, well, let's have a prayer before we go. Would anybody care to lead that prayer? I always want to open that up to anybody who may want to, because, we're all sisters here. Anybody?
I'll do it.
Okay, great, thanks, Kathy.
Dear Lord, thank you so much for this day, and thank you for the many blessings in our lives, and thank you so much for Veronica sharing this so we can better equip ourselves with the information that's so readily available to us, but where we can understand it. We thank you for she is a blessing. Thank you for these ladies, and please see that we all get home safe, and thank you for our families, and we just thank you for this study. Be with us all in Christ's name. Amen.
Thank you, Kathy.
You're welcome.
Next week, the Lord willing, we'll talk about the New Testament canon. Yep.
It's attached.
Yeah. I added.
Flowers do.
That's this morning.
They haven't come out. I mean, the green is coming out. There's no blooms coming
I've
out.
got lots of stuff, but it's almost just ready to
I'll send
pop.
you a link
Okay,
to
so
the
they
video
got the yellow under
for
Yeah, they're almost identical. In fact, I planted them together,
That's
but I didn't know.
that's the gold star.
He's all the way from
That one
there.
is.
Oh,